Okay, so let me add my thanks to all of you for coming. I agree with the comments made earlier today that PIAAC, I think, holds potential to be a very rich and useful database. And one of our goals is to do whatever we can at ETS to try to make sure the messaging is correct and that people not only have access to the data, but are able to use the data in lots of different ways and to make correct interpretations for the data. So you're going to hear from other people who are working on the project, particularly around the measurement and the specifics, the frameworks that are being used. So what I'd like to do in the time that I have is sort of give you a brief overview of the project and kind of what we're trying to do with it. So what I want to do is just kind of go through a few areas. What is PIAAC? Which countries are participating? Who's taking PIAAC in each country? How it's being delivered? What's new about it? That is how it differs from what went before it. What it's assessing and what kinds of information it will be able to provide. And I hope we'll have some time at the end for you to ask questions because I'm sure it will not cover all the questions you're going to raise. So it's designed as an international multi-cycle assessment of adults living in households between the ages of 16 and 65 years of age. As Eugene mentioned, it's the most comprehensive international survey of adult skills ever undertaken. It assesses the level of skills possessed by adults in participating countries and provides important background information about these adults and their lives. So one of the things that I think is really unique about adult assessments, and unlike school assessments like NAEP, is that the background information is so varied and so vast that you get this built-in validity study because you see how skills are connected to various aspects of people's lives, to their demographic characteristics, to their employment, access and attainment, to educational outcomes, and to social outcomes that include things like subjective well-being and health. So it's, I think, a very rich data set that's capable of addressing a pretty wide range of policy questions. So as Eugene mentioned, round one involves 24 OECD and partner countries, involves 37 different language versions, so you can imagine the challenges in putting it together. And round two adds another 10 countries and 13 language versions. Round one, the results will be released in 2013. The OECD will have a press release in October, and we're planning to hold a research conference here in DC in November of 2013 around the study. And round two goes to the field in the spring of 13, and results will be released in May of 2016. So here are the 24 round one countries who are going to come together in January to see their national results for the first time. And here are the round two countries who will meet right after that to get trained for doing their field tests. So I think PIAAC, if you look at the countries combined, you're probably talking about countries that make up 80% of the world's GDP. So these are large countries. Many of them, most of them are sort of the developed countries in the world with large economies, and they for sure are looking forward to this data, and they for sure will take this data and have its significant impact in their countries. Because each country pays its own way, not only to the international overhead, but then they pay their own way to do the national collection. And my experience has been they use the data to bring about policy changes, both at the Department of Labor and at the minister level in education. So these kinds of studies turn out to be quite important for many of these countries. Oops. So PIAAC is administered in face-to-face interviews. So we do, or actually WestEd does, a national probability sample. They go door to door, engage people within households who are eligible to participate in the survey. So this round of PIAAC has a goal of 5,000 completed cases. the primary mode of delivery of PIAAC is computer. So interviewers have a laptop, they go door to door with the laptop. The interviewers get the respondents to participate, and they participate on the laptop. So that's the primary mode of delivery. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that any large-scale assessment has ever been delivered on computer from beginning to end. And I'll say a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. So that was a major innovation and challenge in building and delivering PIAAC. But we knew that as we were developing this, that there would be a percentage of people in every country who would not be able to take the assessment on the computer, either because they had no computer experience or they just didn't want to do it on a computer. So we had to build a parallel version in paper and pencil. So when interviewers went into the households, they really went prepared to either administer the cognitive part of the assessment on the computer or to have a parallel version in paper. So this was, as you can imagine, a little bit complex, but all seemed to work well. So what's new about PIAAC? Well, the first thing is that it was designed to link to previous assessments, including NALS, IALS, and all. So countries who are participated in all of these surveys can actually look at trends of how the adult population performed going all the way back to 1990. So you can see how particular demographic groups and cohorts have changed over this period of time and across these various surveys. So, I don't know. So in order to be able to look at people in participating countries, some of whom took it on paper and some of whom took it on the computer, we had to design what was called a mode effect study. Because in the end, what we want to do is be able to put the literacy scales that were administered in paper on the same scale as the ones that were delivered by computer. So they were designed to measure the same construct, and about 60% of the items were identical. So we had to adapt the paper to the computer, and then we had to do a mode study effect to ensure that you could in fact put the paper and the computer on the same scale. So this was a fairly complicated study that all countries participated in, including the US, and I'm happy to say both in the field test and in the main survey it worked. And so we do have these comparable scales that not only link across modes, but also going back to previous surveys. One of the things that's unique about about PIAAC is that it extended the range of skills that was measured, and I'll say more about that. So in the past, it was literacy and numeracy primarily. Now we've extended both down and up. We've included a measure of reading components. Again, this is to my understanding, and John Sabatini will say more about this later. This is the first international study that's ever attempted to measure reading components across languages and countries. We also extended the upper end to look at problem solving in technology environments, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon as well, and I'll say a little bit more about it shortly. You probably won't care about this, but this is exciting for us at ETS. ETS introduced what's called multi-stage adaptive testing. This is the first time this kind of adaptive testing has been introduced and used in a large-scale assessment. What it basically allows you to do is to get more efficient measurement of the people, because you can tailor which set of items they get that's closer to their ability. So this was an important step forward from ETS's point of view, but also from the assessment of large-scale assessments. Again, you won't care about this, but what it does is it reduces measurement error, for those of you who might. All the items are open-ended. There are no multiple choice items used in PIAAC, and all the items were scored automatically. So this became very efficient in terms of processing the data, and it also improved the quality of the data, and again is a first for this kind of assessment. We're also able to expand the kinds of information that are captured and used. So in addition to just getting right, wrong information. We also gather information about the time it takes for people to respond to an item, how long it takes them to start, how long it takes them to go to certain kinds of actions, as well as being able to capture and extract some of the process and strategy information. And we're hoping to incorporate some of that into the analyses, but also to set up sort of a research program that allows us to use that information to enrich the kinds of feedback and the kinds of papers that we can produce. So as I said, the main elements of PIAAC include reading components, literacy, numeracy, problem solving in technology-rich environments, and a fairly lengthy and engaged background questionnaire. I'm not going to spend any time talking about these because what you're going to hear for the rest of the day and into tomorrow, John Sabatini is going to talk about the literacy framework and reading components. Kintaro from ETS is going to talk about the numeracy framework. Ann Britt, who is a member of the problem-solving expert group, is going to talk about that construct. And then Matthias is going to talk to you tomorrow about the background questionnaire. What I will say is that the way these assessments are developed is that there's an international expert group for each of the constructs. So literacy, numeracy, problem solving, and the BQ had its own expert group. They met over the first year of the project to develop a framework which basically lays out a blueprint for the construct. What do you want to measure? Why you want to measure it? And I think you have a book on your table that was published by the OECD, which is a synopsis of the work that they engaged in, and you're going to hear more about that over the course of today and tomorrow. What I would like to say, and this kind of goes back and emphasizes the point that I think Eugene was making, which is in IALS and all, literacy was really divided into prose and document literacy. And in IALS, there was a measure of quantitative literacy that linked back to NOWs, and all introduced the construct of numeracy. So for PIAAC, we tried to do a couple things. One is we decided to integrate the document and prose literacy into a single scale called reading literacy. We decided to look below that because one of the criticisms, and rightly so, that we received for NOWs, for IALS, for all, was that we would tell people that there was X% of the people down at the bottom of the distribution, but we could never say anything about why they were there, what kinds of skills they did exhibit. We could just say, these are the things they couldn't do. So we decided to try to introduce reading components to be able to understand better what some of the skills were and what some of the problems that the people at the lower end of the scale would face. Similarly, we introduced problem solving in technology environments for two reasons. One, it's hard to imagine that people can function fully in our society without access to technology and without some facility to use technology to address the kinds of information challenges they face, whether it's problem solving or reading or whatever. So we introduced that construct. The other thing, as I said, is we combined reading literacy. So when we talk about looking at trends, what we're talking about is being able to go all the way back to the nows to look at reading literacy, because Kintaro and Matthias have rescaled all of the nows data, all of the IALS data, all of the all data, and are in the process of doing some things with null, so that we can look at a trend line for reading literacy all the way back to 1990. We also will be able to establish a trend line for numeracy that links back to the all, and we'll be able to introduce these two new constructs. So let me tell you, or at least this will be the only graph I'll show you, so you'll have to bear with me. But I want to tell you why we decided that reading components and problem solving would be important to introduce. So this will be a little bit hard for you to understand maybe, but if you look at the vertical axis, it really talks about sort of the probability or expected value that someone would get on a test. And if you look along the bottom axis, it's really like the literacy proficiency. So what that blue line represents, we would call a test characteristics curve. But what you should think of it as is, how does performance on that blue line, which represents reading components, relate to literacy along the bottom line? So what you can see, and we use 80% as what we would say someone is proficient if they would have an 80% chance or score 80% on a test, right? So you could see that 80% line is right between 225 and 250 on the reading components. So what that shows is that if you're down at the lower end of literacy, that is you're below, let's say 250, you see a strong correlation between reading components and literacy proficiency. But once you get above that 80%, that line flattens out. Our interpretation of that is that reading components are quite critical to you developing adequate literacy skills. So where is that level 3 that you hear about from NAEPs? It's right at 275. But the components don't do nearly as good a job explaining performance once you reach level 3, because that line gets pretty flat. So you can now begin, from a policy point of view, understand better how reading components relates to the development of literacy and how it contributes to the development of literacy in the US. The question is, well, how does this work across other countries? So in PIAAC, we're going to be able to develop a graphic that looks like this across all the countries and get a much deeper understanding of whether that relationship holds, the extent to which it does, because we're looking both at accuracy and fluency, and John will tell you more about that. The red line is a test characteristics curve from a problem-solving assessment that was done in all, but not used in the US. There, what you can see is if you look at 80% and where that criteria is, that's all the way up above level 4 on the literacy scale as it was defined in NAEPs, right? And if you're only in level 2, you have less than a 40%, your expected score on that test would be around 40% or less. So what that says to us is literacy, and we think numeracy, are important outcome, critical skills in and of themselves. But if you really want to develop problem-solving skills, if you want to develop really critical skills, as measured here in this kind of a construct, you're going to need to have at least level 3 skills in literacy, and we think will be numeracy. So again, in PIAAC, what we're expecting to be able to do is extend the interpretation of the data using reading components and using problem-solving and technology-rich environments in ways that are similar to this. I mean, this is not PIAAC data. This is not even all data. This is based on different research studies that were done. But what we're going to do is try to replicate this in PIAAC so that we can enrich, from a policy point of view, what the scales are telling us. So that's why it was important, at least from our perspective, to go do that. So that's what this first bullet point means. So we're hoping to get a deeper understanding of the distribution of human capital, especially for those at the high and low ends on the literacy and numeracy scales. So each scale will give us a distribution. We'll be able to look at the percentages of people by various background characteristics and how they fall along each of the scales. But we'll also be able to do the kinds of policy analysis that I just described. Because of the linking and the way the survey was designed, we'll be able to compare across countries, across modes, and over time. So we think this will be a very rich database to talk about how literacy and numeracy skills have changed over time in terms of the distribution of skills by various groups. And we'll be able to compare various groups within and across countries. Because of the length and the richness of the background questionnaire, we're also going to be able to look at key links between the cognitive skills and the background variables. So in addition to be able to look at age and gender and race and ethnicity and other demographic characteristics, there is a fairly extensive questionnaire that relates to attachment to the labor force, the kinds of jobs you've had, whether you're unemployed, looking for work, you're out of the labor force, how often you're attached or how often you're unattached to the labor force, your income, and a host of other variables. We'll be able to look at issues related to training. There's also a lot of questions about skill use on the job and skill use outside of work. It's broken down by reading and math and ICT use. So there's a lot of information that Matthias is going to get into tomorrow that will, I think, be useful in using the database. And as this is a sort of an OECD plug, but it's really looking at how well qualifications match your ability to get access. So what we see when you look within any education level, you see a pretty wide range of ability in terms of skills. So here we'll be able to look at what information, how much more variance does skills account for over and above education. So how important are skills to getting access, succeeding, and engaging in the workplace? Not just looking at educational attainment and how it relates to the workplace, but how education and skills contribute. So we think PIAAC will provide a very rich source of information for policymakers, for researchers, and for others.